Hello, listeners. My name is Esther Snippa from Speaker Hub. If you're new to this podcast, Speaker Hub is Europe's fastest growing network of speakers and trainers, and in this series of interviews, we feature our VIP speakers. They talk with us about their passions and their projects, as well as share ideas on how to become better speakers and communicators. Today I'm talking with a zoologist and values and culture expert named Jackie Lefevre. She talks to us about a variety of topics, but mainly about how tuning into your personal set of values can turn you into a truly engaging and passionate speaker.
To start us off, Jackie, what topics do you talk about?
I tend to talk about topics that relate to who people think they are and what they want to do. So values is my main hook, but around that I talk about things like authenticity and inspiration and courage and fear and the emotions that either get in the way of people fulfilling their potential or the emotions that ease people on so they can become as truly brilliant as I know they are and basically shine. I talk about things that help people shine.
That's a lovely thing to talk about. How did you get started with these quite broad topics of values?
It comes from where I started in the beginning, which was as a zoologist. I was fascinated throughout my school career and then my university career by the behaviour of animals. I have always found them extremely good company, whereas there are occasionally human beings that I meet that I think, too sure about you.
That's good company.
But animals, I just think are marvellous. And part of the reason I find them so marvellous is because they are just being.
Okay.
They are just getting on and doing what they need to do to get by. There's no artifice, there's no pretense, there's no inauthenticity in that. So I've been always interested in why they do what they do, because in any given situation, an animal's always got a choice. It could do A, or it could do B, or it might do C. So, but it then does something, and it always does the thing that to it looks like the best way of achieving a survival outcome. So there's a purity of intent about animal behavior, and that I loved. And so to get into all of that, but what that pushes you into thinking about is context. So where is this place? What is this point in time? What are the pressures? What are the constraints? What are the opportunities? So it's quite fuzzy stuff. To find a golden thread to pull all of that together, the lens I chose to look through in the end was values. So values are, in simple terms, things that are meaningful to us as individuals. Now, my values will be different to your values because you've lived your life and I've lived my life. So I've learned certain things about the way the world works, and your world has worked for you in slightly different ways. But there's likely to be some common ground between our values. So I've got a really big value around discovery, insight. I love not just learning stuff, but I love that moment of revelation where you've learned something and suddenly it makes sense of something else that you learned before that you didn't quite grasp. But now that you've learned this other thing, you think, it all goes together like this, and now it all makes sense. And I love that.
Yes. Okay.
I love that. And with the work that you do, Esther, in talking to people about what they do, you've probably got quite a strong research kind of originality, pioneering kind of thing going on in there to discover all these new things. And then that aligns very much with my insight value, if that makes sense. So the short answer to your question is I've ended up doing this now because it's actually a glorious synthesis of all the things I've learned over the last 30 years. And it's just, values have just crystallized it and brought it all together.
Oh, that's beautiful. So when you give a talk, how do you assess the audience and decide what aspect of values you're going to talk about?
You have to start by listening to the person who's inviting you in. And what you're trying to hear is where the energy is in what they're saying. I'll give you a story to illustrate this. Somebody phoned me up a couple of years ago now, and they were from a local government, in a council in the UK, and they were organising an annual conference for their stakeholders. So this is different voluntary and community sector groups, different private sector organisations, different companies, health professionals and police and so on. So this big multi-agency conference, and they put this on every year. So this guy phones me up and he says, Jackie, we'd like you to come and talk about modernising the voluntary and community sector. I don't think he realised that he sighed before he said the title of the talk. And I said, okay, right. He said, can you do that? And so I said, no. And he went, oh. And I said, so the thing is now, you need to go back to whoever's tasked you to speak to me and say to them, what is it that is most important? Is it most important that we get Jackie in to talk about something? Or is it most important that we have a talk on the modernisation of the voluntary and community sector? And I said to him, and the reason I say this is, there are lots of people who know that topic far better than me. And with my values around kind of personal authority, integrity, I can't come out and talk about something that I don't know as well as other people do, because really you should have them. However, if what you want is you want me to come and talk about something, then that's fine. And we can talk about your conference program and we'll find something that fits in and complements the rest of the program, but that I can authentically talk about. Right, he said. I said, just go and find out what it is that's most important. So then he phoned me back an hour later and again, I've been told we have to get you because you can be quite funny. I said, okay, fine. So what you want is you want a topic that fits in your agenda, but that can have a lightness of touch brought to it. You want some idiosyncratic stories. You want a little bit of kind of quotes that are slightly on the cynical side that will raise a bit of a smile. He said, yeah, that's what we want. I said, okay, that I can do. Send me the rest of the conference program and I will write you something that fits into the gap.
And tell us, how did the speech go? How was the talk?
It was fine. I enjoyed it. I did get some laughs. I won some fans and some critics from it, because in the context of the conference, it was appropriate to lay down a bit of a challenge to some of the larger public sector agencies, because it was in the context of austerity, so reducing budgets in terms of statutory services. So they were needing to look for cheaper ways of doing things, and they were looking at the voluntary and community sector going, well, if you're a charity and you've got volunteers and you've got less overheads, you should be able to deliver that service to people that you care about. So it's a good service for you to deliver, but you can do it cheaper than we can. So we'll take this service and we'll commission it from you because it'll be cheaper.
Okay.
Now, that's not the greatest reason to go commission that service from those people. Really, if you're looking at public services, you need to commission from people who will do a good job for the right reasons.
Okay.
And then you buy it if you can afford it. It's a slightly different logic. So in my talk, I laid down that logic as a challenge and said, don't start with price. Start with quality. And then you buy the best quality you can afford. So at the end of it all, one of the senior officers in the local authority that was hosting the conference came up to me and said, very interesting, cheers for that. It just made my life more difficult. And I thought, well, you know what? If that's because you were looking for an easy way out, then I'm quite glad I did.
So sometimes you don't mind being a little bit controversial if it gets people talking.
I think as long as it's appropriate and as long as there's grounds for it.
Okay.
I'm not a great one for kind of throwing a lighted torch into the middle room just to wake people up. That's kind of not I'm not a kind of shock and awe kind of girl, really. But if it's appropriate to challenge the conventional wisdom, because actually the conventional wisdom is only giving us more of the same, and more of the same is not the answer, then yes, I'm very happy to challenge.
So what advice would you have for speakers who tend to go on the safe route, to be more courageous and to be more brave?
It's about finding your authentic voice. It's about sounding like who you actually are rather than trying to sound like somebody else. Because a lot of the advice I was given in the early days was, oh, they're really good, copy what they do. Oh, listen to them. They're dead wicked. They are. They're fantastic. Just do what they do. But none of it rang true. And if it doesn't ring true, you can lose your audience in a split second. You need to know what your values are, what it is that you stand for, who you see yourself as. So I have a really high priority value around simplicity play. And simplicity play value is about finding simplicity and complexity and finding playful ways of communicating that people find energizing. So it's fine for me to tell self-depreciating stories. It's fine for me to stand there and say, I thought I knew it all, and I ended up in this situation. Oh, and this happened and that happened. And then I thought, oh, Fevre, you need to learn a thing or two before you open your mouth next time. I'm very comfortable doing that. Someone else who maybe had a high priority around being respected by others would not feel necessarily comfortable to tell that kind of story. So I would never say to them, tell that kind of story. I'd say, find a story that you can tell that is true to your values. And then you will come across as authentic. You won't need actually as much bottle to do it because it's true and because it's you. And the audience will come with you. They'll believe it because it's true. And then you've got them, really. So just be yourself.
And what happens when you try to adopt somebody else's style? What have you seen happen in the past with either yourself or other speakers?
In the early days, I tried being some other people, and it was a disaster. I completely lost my thread. And not only losing my thread, but I lost the tone that I had been using to try and tell the story in the sense of unpack the information for people. And whilst to the audience, it may seem like you've just sort of indulged in a slightly dramatic pause before you go into the slide, to you as the speaker, it feels like you've stood there for 5 minutes saying nothing. And what that does is that floods your system with cortisol. Cortisol is a stress chemical. Now, chemists call cortisol, I think this is great, they call it a stupid chemical, because what cortisol does is it floods into your prefrontal cortex. So that's your big crinkly bit of the brain at the front of the head where your rational, logical processing takes place. Cortisol floods in there and literally shuts it down, stops you from being able to think. Now, it's got a good adaptive reason. I mean, this comes back from the days when we were hunter-gatherers and we would be out looking for prey on the savannah. You got this cortisol response so that if you see a lion, this stuff floods into your head. You immediately run and climb a tree. You don't stand there thinking to yourself, I wonder if it's going to get me or get Bob, because if it's heading for Bob, I've got nothing to worry about. You don't want to be doing any thinking in a threat situation like that.
No, you want to be running up a tree.
You want to be running. Yeah, you don't want to be kind of staring the lion and going, hey, his teeth.
No time to think, just go.
Yeah, does he floss? He looks fantastic. No, you don't want to do that. What you want to do is be up a tree or down a hole or somewhere out of the way. The problem is, in 21st century life, we don't face those sorts of threats anymore, but we still produce a lot of cortisol. If we feel threatened, like forgetting what the next slide is, that can make us feel very vulnerable. That produces a load of cortisol, and then that impacts on our performance. The beautiful thing about speaking from your values-enabled voice is that when you are personally connected with your highest priority values, it buffers you from cortisol. It actually physiologically protects you from the worst of the stress responses. So remaining in your own voice and telling your own story is key to being able to perform to your peak.
Oh, that's a fantastic insight, Jackie. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. My last question for today is, can you tell us a bit about the organizations you work with and what it is that you do with them?
I run my own company, which is called Magma Effect, and we work predominantly in the UK, but we can work further afield. If anybody'd like to invite us out to play, we would love to come. And we use values as a golden thread for doing all kinds of things, from strategic planning and governance development and leadership workshops and all those sorts of things, to slightly more nuanced work where increasingly we get involved in supporting organizations to evaluate their work. So not to assess, which is kind of counting stuff as to whether did we make all those sales? Oh, yes, we did. Not that stuff, but the more how did we end up with those results? Given where we started and the things that we did, how is it that those things led to those results? Because that's quite a big, messy question. And it's very much about some of those things I was mentioning at the beginning in terms of behavioral ecology. It's about the environment and the pressures and the dynamics of the different interactions as you went along. And that tends to be a values story to be told. What it was that you were projecting, how you were responding to other people, and how they were receiving. So we do a lot of that kind of thing. So that's all great. But the thing that's actually quite exciting over and above that at the moment for me is being involved with the Minescence International Cooperative. So Minescence is the home of the AVI values profiling tool, which is one of the main things that I work with. And just over a year ago now, a group of us from around the world set up this brand new cooperative to both function as the home of the AVI tool, but more importantly, as a learning organisation for anybody interested in practicing with values and becoming more value able in their own work and their own life as a whole. So that's very exciting. Just over a year old, so really quite new, but gaining momentum. And the purpose of the Minescence International Cooperative is to enable people to bring values to life. And that's it.
Oh, that's wonderful. Jackie, it was such a pleasure to talk with you today. I feel like I could have just kept talking for another 20 minutes here. You're very engaging to listen to. So thank you very much for speaking with me today.
Thank you, Esther. It's been an absolute pleasure.
And also to you, audience, thanks for listening. Did you have any questions or comments about this interview or any of the topics we covered today? We'd love to connect. You can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter at SpeakerHubHQ. Find more interviews with our VIP speakers on www.speakerhub.com.